according to John. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Martha was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus. Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then, after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and are you going to go there again? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble because they see the light of the world. But those who walk at night stumble because the light is not in them. After saying this, he told them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will be all right. Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought that he was referring merely to sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. For your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him. Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of God. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, the teacher is here and calling for you. And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, where have you been? Oh my goodness. Where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, already there is a stench because he has been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, God, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary, had seen what Jesus did, believed in him. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
There are a few different directions that we could focus on in today's gospel reading from John. We could wonder about the signs that John has been pointing to throughout the whole season of Lent. We could focus on what it means for Jesus to resurrect someone just shortly before his own resurrection. We could only focus on the promise of hope, which might be the comfortable place to put our energy today. But today, for me, what came forward over and over again as I studied the scriptures was grief. And not just grief, but all the emotions and behaviors that go along with grief. We see fear and difficult decision-making in this scripture. We see blame and worry. We see hesitation, but also actions taken that not everyone agrees with. We see tears and weeping. And then we begin to see some healing. Healing from the grief. Healing found in hope and the promise of new life that only God can provide. The thing about grief is that healing doesn't happen instantly. We don't like to sit in the pain and suffering. We don't like to sit and wait in the discomfort of someone else's grief and loss. We want to get to the comfortable place, to the hopeful place of healing. We don't want to just know that everything will be okay. We want to know how, and we want to have all the answers while we are in that place of pain to make it go by faster. Maybe it will make it a little better. If we don't have to sit in the what ifs or the if they die, they will miss fill in the blank. We think that maybe if we don't have to be in that place, we'll be healed, or we'll at least feel healed. But healing doesn't happen on its own. Grief is a part of the recipe, unfortunately, to healing. So today, let's sit in the grief of the gospel reading. Lazarus has died, and certainly with death comes grief. His sisters, Martha and Mary, are grieving his death. They're going through all the stages of grief. And what really stood out to me is how in verse 21, Martha says to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." And then again in verse 32, Mary says the same thing to Jesus. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Sometimes in death, we need to wish that if something had been different, the outcome would have changed. We might think, if only I had gone to visit more. Or we might need to place blame on someone else to make our grief hurt a little less. If only you had been here, my brother would not have died. Ultimately, in our healing, we realize this isn't true, but in the moment of grief, healthy thoughts aren't present. We haven't gotten to that place of healing yet. Our brains physically don't have the same ability to make rational thoughts and take rational actions when we are in grief. In times of grief, we often act from a place of fear, not logical thought. I really appreciate how the Bible models the realities of life for us, even today. Who in this room has experienced grief in some form or fashion in their life? Everybody's hand went up, I think. And if you haven't, we can talk about it, because I'm sure you have, and maybe you just are not, recognizing it, which is a state of grief. We all grieve. Everyone goes through loss, the doubts, fears, blame, and confusion that come with it. Grief isn't something we go through alone, or that we have to experience alone. When Jesus heard that Lazarus was ill, he waited to go to him. Then he decided it was time to go visit him with the disciples after he died. And the disciples tried to talk Jesus out of it. The disciples were fearful of what would come if Jesus returned to a place where he was in danger. The disciples are grieving and fearful of the what if, and Jesus is grieving his friend. A beautiful and sacred moment occurs in this gospel story when Jesus weeps. This weeping is a soft, sad cry, not the same loud, wailing cry that we are going to hear of Mary at the cross crying for Jesus. As Jesus weeps, I can't help but wonder what thoughts were going through his head. Was he questioning what Martha and Mary said to him? If he had been here, his friend wouldn't have died. Was he wondering if the power of God through him would actually work to raise Lazarus from the dead? Was he afraid of what might happen to him if he performed another miracle? It is a gift to see the humanity of Jesus here in his tears. He wept, plain and simple. He expressed his sadness, fears, and worries through his tears. We see Jesus as fully divine and fully human throughout this text. And I think it is important for us to lean into both aspects of Jesus. Jesus' divinity connects him to God in a way beyond our comprehension. But yet we still need to be reminded that Jesus has the power to raise people back to life because God was in him. Well, at the same time, Jesus cried just like you and I. Jesus knows what it is like to experience loss. He grieved and experienced everything that it encompasses. Questioning yourself, blaming others, wishing things could have been different, wondering how long will the pain last, and then taking actions or making decisions out of emotion instead of rational thought. Now this might sound like a bummer of a sermon today, and I'm sorry for feeling that energy a little bit, but there is good news for us, because Jesus weeps with us. Like I said at the beginning, we have to sit in that grief. We have to recognize it when it comes about for us. And Jesus is with us in those times. God knows the sadness, pain, doubt, and fear that we experience in life, and God holds us in these feelings because God felt what Jesus felt as a human. What beautiful news to know that God holds those whom we grieve, and God does this whether we remember in our grief and fear to stop and pray. Now that's good news. Our faith helps us to hold on to this promise. But even if we are so wrapped up in our grief that we forget this, God never forgets. God is the one who brings healing. It is our job to recognize our grief, notice our behaviors and actions that come from it, and when we are ready, lean into the promise of new life in God. Lean into that place of healing. But don't jump there right away. Take time to go through that grief. Because God will continue to work through Jesus to raise us up out of death to new life, time after time. God is our eternal healer and comforter. And in this, we can rest